good morning, and thanks all of you for taking some time to come spend with us discussing some of what I certainly believe are the most important issues facing our state, and some of the things that are pretty common talk in coffee shops and bars around Wyoming. So I just wanted to say welcome before we get kicked into this discussion. I'll kick it over to the Governor for his welcome.
Well, it's amazing. When we were talking about this, Brian, I think you just made the mention, who would go to Du Bois in the middle of the week? And with this room being full, I think it's a real reassurance of what is important in Wyoming is our outdoors, our wildlife. And if I might, and it's just wonderful to have you all here. And Dan, thank you so much for this opportunity. What a great facility you have here. And there's just great people in this room. But I was on the way up here, I was thinking about a quote from T.A. Larson, who was sort of the preeminent Wyoming historian, and he wrote two books. One just called Wyoming, which was published in about 1980. So put this in context. Almost no part of the country has the opportunity now facing Wyoming to demonstrate what America could have been if planners and developers had traded some short-term profits for long-term gains. It is possible that Wyoming could emerge from the primitive isolation, but in such a way that its greatest values are preserved and its old way of life left for those who choose to follow it. Development does not necessarily have to be a story of unmitigated, unrelieved disaster. While it appears that the people of Wyoming are going to have to sacrifice, in part, some of the things they have valued most, there is still hope that much can be salvaged. Perhaps it is not yet time to grieve. Wyoming still has enough of its old magic to stir the blood of visitor and native alike, but surely it is time to reflect on the joy that Whistler savored and ponder whether what the world wants from Wyoming is worth more than what Wyoming already offers the world. That was 1980. Things don't change a lot in Wyoming. And I grew up in a little town, KC, where things still are back in the 1880s. So.
Well, thank you for your welcome, Governor. I did want to start this off by talking a little bit about, how we got here. And many of you may not know, but the Good Idea Ferry does really like Governor Gordon's office, and really kind of likes his vehicle, likes his airplane. The Good Idea Ferry is around with Governor Gordon a lot, but anyway, this was one of those times when actually the Good Idea Ferry dropped a really good idea in his lap, and he said, you know what, this is only a couple months ago. He said, we really need to bring Wyoming people together in a sportsman kind of a forum and talk about all these cool things. So tell me a little bit, Governor, about what your thoughts were when you envisioned this whole idea of bringing all these folks together today.
Well, I actually remember some of the ideas coming from being in the middle of the thoroughfare with you and Lee last year, kind of talking about the things that mattered most to us about Wyoming. And I think everybody here kind of shares those reflections. I mean, it's about the outdoors, it's about wildlife, it's about open spaces, and it's about kind of coming together. I see Jim Nyman, my friend there, just had the Old West Turkey Hunt, and the people that gathered there, that came there, that said, this part of Wyoming, this state, is the most remarkable place, and it's just good people, they care about things. And in this national discussion that we're having now, it's election season, I know, but here's the thing. At the national level, we're talking about a lot of stuff, and we talk about it in terms of, this posture or that posture. Here in Wyoming, when it comes to the outdoors, when it comes to our wildlife, when it comes to our natural resources, we care about the detail, not the posture, the detail. And I think what our conversation is how can we make sure that we engage with sportsmen and understand how important that whole topic of what do we do about our wonderful state, how do we make sure that we keep those values we care about most and make sure that our state is great for those that come after, And let's have that conversation with our sportsmen.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember a lot of that discussion too about, talking about the what and the how, and oftentimes the debate and the contentiousness comes around those two issues, but really wildlife conservation is a unifying issue in Wyoming because almost everybody agrees at the end of the day on the why. The why is a unifying issue for our state, why this is so important to our quality of life and to the major impactors to our economy and influencers on our economy. We talked about different topics, and I remember actually discussion about a list of probably a couple dozen topics, and we've narrowed it down to a handful. Our hunting heritage and talking about the why, wildlife crossings, mule deer, invasives and feral horses, wildlife habitats and connectivity. Talk a little bit, Governor, about why you thought those were particularly important for this first forum of this nature.
Yeah, well, and thank you, Brian. I mean, as you said, there's just so many topics that we could talk about. And it is so exciting to see as many people here that care as much as they do. So I hope we are able to repeat this over and over again to really talk about that host of issues. These topics are sort of top of mind. Wyoming has, and I think many of the people in this room know that, we've led the way in so many respects. I see that we have representatives from the tribes here. You think about the Eastern Shoshones, they made the winds roadless well before anybody in the federal government thought about it. They made that case. We were able to recover, thanks to the game and fish, the black-footed ferret. We've done a phenomenal job on sage grouse. Really, nobody else has done it the same way we have. We are the first to talk about migration corridors. And so to continue that leadership at a national level, and let me back up for a second, because one of the things that I get most concerned about, the conversation about conservation has changed so dramatically over my lifetime. And I can remember, my dad came here in 1932 and was out at the CM Ranch. And Charlie Moore, who owned it at the time, was one of the very first conservationists. His papers on conservation are down in the museum in Denver. And the people I grew up with on the ranch, I see Jim McGagna here. Jim, I'm sure you would say the same thing. All the ranchers were about, what do we do to make sure that we protect this landscape, that we understand the value of what we have here. So for Wyoming, I think it's critical that we emphasize the importance of understanding what happens on the ground, the science, and not be lured by the temptation of, let's just take a posture, this is bad, this is quote-unquote conservation, and that means we can't do anything else here. And so these 5 topics, I think, were a good entrance into this conversation.
Yeah, I completely agree. And, we could actually spend several days just on those 5 topics, but like you, I think that just based on what we see here today, we're going to have the opportunity to replicate this in the future and be able to talk about more of these really important issues in Wyoming. So, I did see that we have, I saw Representative Byron, Representative Winter, Senator Hicks. I hope I didn't miss any of the other legislators in the room, but it made me think, how important, from your perspective, is the manner in which we have these conversations around wildlife policy and being respectful and constructive when we craft wildlife policies, both for the executive branch and the legislative branch, and for all those folks that have inputs into those processes.
Well, I think it's absolutely essential, and if there is, as I started to say, one of the things that can tie us together is our respect and our love for the outdoors. We may not all agree, but I think it's those conversations, and as I looked at the guest list here today, the wide variety of attitudes and opinions on this. It's just wonderful to have people engaged in this conversation. I think I saw Ted Carasotti was going to be in the guest. I don't know if Ted's here, but Ted has a wonderful book, Blood Ties, he wrote a long time ago. But I always loved it because he talks about three hunting adventures. One, clubbing seals in Iceland, and another one with a trophy hunt in Russia, and another one, his elk hunt in Jackson. All of those are interesting because he points out, kind of the uniqueness of each of those situations in a way that maybe you wouldn't have expected. It's really well written. But what I found the best was this afterword in which he said, I've talked, and it's been a long time ago, so it's a paraphrase, but I've talked to a lot of lobbyists in D.C. and somebody who's really aggressive about deer actually knows nothing about the habitat, knows nothing about what deer look like, but just the concept is important. And so if you start from that, we're not going to engage with another point of view, you're not going to get very far. But that's what's great about Wyoming. We see it on the ground here. We can talk about what the issues are. We can come to, I hope, agreement, as we have, on a number of very controversial topics, and we've really kind of led the nation in doing that. I wish that DC would pay more attention to what we've been able to accomplish here, because I think in that whole realm of what do we do with this country, it's going to be critical that we learn how to talk together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the initiatives in the manners in which Wyoming led on migration corridors is a really, really good example of that. That was not an easy issue, and it was discussed and cussed for many, many years, and when you put together the right group of folks and brought them in the room and we took the time to analyze all the science, the biological science, the social science, and the political science, we're able to come to a policy that really, really works for Wyoming, and everybody else wants to replicate now. So I think that's one really good illustration out of a lot of different great initiatives that our state can lay claim to over the last several years. So I did see also Representative Western. Thanks for being here today, Representative Western. To kind of, I guess, chart the course for the day, Governor, what do you see for the day? What are your desired outcomes, when we look at what we're going to do here today? And what's your kind of message to these folks and what we want to get out of this day?
I'm here to learn, so it's kind of awkward to be up here talking at you, and I apologize for that. But I think the opportunity to have those discussions, to figure out policy that we can move forward on, get some unique perspectives, and most especially, I think, for me, it's what are the things that are going to come out of this first conference that we can actually put in play, either at a policy level, at a legislative level, stuff I'd like to take to DC. We've already had a couple of really good inroads there, working with Secretary Vilsack. We were able to, I think you were there for when we signed the agreement that finally recognized that private lands have a really important role for wildlife habitat, and that should be recognized as part of the resource. I think there are some other issues that maybe we can help inform what goes on from a policy standpoint. So my hope is that this will be productive, that people will engage, that people will come away more knowledgeable, and I hope, because it is a very full day, I hope nobody feels like the whole conversation has ended as of today. I hope it spurs more conversation, more direction, and frankly more engagement for sportsmen on the political forum, because I think sportsmen have not been represented in a broader conversation about these topics, either on a national level or even locally.
And I think that's an excellent point, Governor. And when you talk to, policymakers, they want to hear from sportsmen, and when they don't, they're left to make decisions without their input. And so I think that's an excellent point. So before we wrap this up and move on to the great panels we've got that'll probably be, I expect to be very interesting today, I did want to again thank the attendees here. And then we had a steering committee that worked hard on putting this together and arranging the panelists and all of the facilitators. Katie Cheesebro, Josh Corsi, Lee Livingston, Joy Bannon, Jess Johnson, Tony Shonen, Chris McBarnes, Sarah Dorenzo, and Nish Gokhale all were on that group to help put this together. And then a lot of Game and Fish folks have put a lot of hard work into putting this together and setting this all up and making sure that we all have a good day here. I do want to talk about our sponsors, but we'll do that at the end of the day. We've got some great sponsors that you'll be able to see when you go out in the tent for lunch. They've got some booths out there, and then again, Dan Stark, really appreciate the facilities.